From downtown Milwaukee, welcome to Money Talk with Bob Landis. Each week, professional advisors from Landis & Company Investments discuss the latest financial developments, offering timely insight and long-term perspective.
This is Money Talk for May 16th, 2025. Let's check the calendar. The Brewers are home with the Twins this weekend, then followed by the Orioles. If you think your hearing is okay, I've got something to cure you of that. Metal Fest at the Rave this weekend with a metal. What's a Metal Fest? Well, it's extra loud, trashy rock and roll.
What?
Spoken as a true fan. What if that's not to your liking? There's multiple Grammy Award winner, Oscar winner, and multiple admissions into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Paul Simon, at the Riverside this weekend. Okay, let's get started. I'm guessing Elon Musk has never read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. A 98-year-old World War II veteran rolled a tank over a Tesla in protest over Elon's political influence. The vet said, "We've crushed fascism before and we'll crush it again." My money's on the 98-year-old guy. A Florida man is facing charges after he offered Highland County deputies an alcohol beverage during a pursuit. Richard Smith of Miami stole several items, including alcoholic beverages, from the Spring Lake Market. Smith was seen driving circles around the market with the cops in hot pursuit. But the best part of the story is during the chase, deputy said Smith held a can of Kettle One vodka spritz out of the window as he drove by, yelling to the deputy, "I was just going to give you one." Oh, yeah, he got arrested. And finally, another Floridian was detained in Orlando. He told staff at a Tiffany & Company store he was interested in buying earrings and a diamond ring on behalf of one of the Orlando Magic basketball players. The 4 diamond earrings and diamond ring were worth nearly $600,000. They were recovered 2 weeks after he swallowed them. And I guess recovered is a nicer way to put that. All right, on the podcast today, we have Dave Sandstrom, Kendall Bauer, Joel Driesing, and wrapping up the week, here's Kyle Tetting.
Well, great job again, as always, Max, and thank you for that. Easy week to be happy. Big gains on the NASDAQ, the S&P, the Dow alike. The NASDAQ up 7.2% this week, 1,283 points. S&P up 5.3, finishing the week at 59.58. That's up 298 on the week. I'm almost remiss to include the Dow. It just up just a 3.4%, closing at the bell on Friday in New York at 42,655, up 332 points just on the day for the Dow. For the year, a positive 0.7% for the Dow, the S&P up 1.7%, including dividends on the year. And despite the plus 7% week, the NASDAQ still negative territory, down 0.3%. Dave, it's hard not to start today with what has been just an incredible run higher for the stock market. I look at, not just this week's numbers, but numbers over the past couple of weeks. And it's hard not to be at least a little giddy about the gains we're seeing again. Now, to be fair, coming off of pretty meaningful lows, pretty meaningful declines. And I think maybe a word of caution that we don't have a lot of different information than what we had from those lows. We just have a market that seems to be more risk on than it has been, going back a month or a month and a half.
Yeah, Kyle, you do have to kind of ask yourself, okay, what is different than it was 3 or 4 weeks ago? Obviously, we've gotten a reprieve on the tariffs, and markets have certainly been hyper-focused on the tariff conversation all year. Liberation Day, as it was called, was the start of the downturn. We had significant selling pressure at that point in time. Of course, then when we paused the tariffs, we saw markets reverse. And ever since then, we've been on this positive upturn. So I would have to say that right now would be a great time if you found yourself feeling unreasonably uncomfortable, I'll put it, during that time frame with your portfolio as it relates to risk. You've gotten a reprieve. We're back to positive numbers on the year in most cases. Most portfolios up again. And if you were really uncomfortable during that time frame, I think now would be a great time to assess your allocations and potentially look at maybe some rebalancing.
Dave, I'd go so far as to say reasonably uncomfortable, not necessarily unreasonably uncomfortable. Kendall, I know you are dealing with many of the same questions that Dave and I see. Market recovery has certainly given us some hope that maybe we can see some stabilization. But what are you kind of looking at with respect to markets, and what are you talking to clients about right now?
Yeah, to piggyback a little bit on what Dave said, love the idea of rebalancing if you were getting a little shaky. But another conversation point is starting to think ahead for second half of the year income aids. So you can in some ways do just that. Now that stocks have recovered, well, maybe it's a good time to consider trimming from some of the ones that are break even or positive now on the year, setting maybe some of that money aside for things like required distributions, charitable gifting, or maybe that new roof if you were impacted from the hailstorm this week.
Yeah, and hopefully for clients that are kind of looking at the potential for retirement, or just for investors more broadly looking at the potential for, well, I'm about to embark on this very meaningful shift in my work environment, whether it's retirement itself or whether it's just maybe slowing down into what retirement looks like. I think there's this kind of tendency when markets are down to go, oh no, well, now I can't retire. Maybe this is the sign that, yeah, okay, things have come back a little. We've got a little more support. But I think it also speaks to some broader conversations about what retirement actually looks like for clients. And JP Morgan, one of the largest banks in our country, having access to data from more of our fellow country people than just about any other bank, and certainly with their ability to digest that information, a lot of insights into what retirement actually looks like. And I think an interesting conversation, Joel in particular, you've done a lot of work in that area. But I know I forwarded an article to you from JP Morgan just talking about some of the changes that have come in kind of the way we think about retirement spending.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the diversity of ways that people are going at retirement, and it's not a monolith. It's not somebody who quits work one day and then they're retired. I mean, people have all sorts of pathways to retirement and all sorts of different levels of getting out of work and having income from other things. And it really kind of spoke to me about how retirement plans are customized, that people are so different in the way they retire that they really need to figure out, what their individual situation is and have a plan for that.
We have a colleague that forwarded me a retirement plan that ChatGPT put together. It wasn't ChatGPT. It was some version of artificial intelligence the client had essentially prompted this piece of artificial intelligence to say, here's my assets, here's what I'm thinking as far as retirement. Tell me if it's feasible. And it's always interesting to me when we find new applications for that technology. The challenge, of course, is, and Kendall, maybe this is where our conversations come in with clients. The software doesn't know you. It doesn't know the individual. It doesn't understand how you're going to respond. For example, in the early days of April when the market fell apart, it doesn't know what you're going to do in that scenario. And so potentially it speaks a little more to, yeah, great, have the plan, but also how do you navigate uncertainty?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a cookie cutter approach. I can't emphasize that enough. Tools like that can be great if you want to see a variety of scenarios, but it's got to come down to the individual. Not everybody has the same time horizon, family health history. Yeah, you have to plan to live to 100, but some people may want to spend more money up front in retirement and slow down as they age. Some people, the other big one that often gets overlooked, people have different priorities, let's say, of what they want to leave assets to their beneficiaries, or oftentimes children. Some people don't have children. So yes, there's rules of thumb, like a 4% withdrawal rate is a great starting point in that conversation. But if somebody's long-term plan is to spend most of their money because they don't have beneficiaries or heirs, I don't think you can squeeze them into the same bucket as somebody that wants to very carefully leave a hefty amount of money to their family for whatever reason they may have. So it's not, income planning in retirement isn't something that you can just throw someone into a model. You got to customize it to each and every individual.
Well, and Kendall, I like that you touched on those Bequest goals, right? The what happens when I can't spend this anymore because I'm not here. And Dave, I know this hits close to home for clients you talk to, maybe for yourself as it does for a lot of us. But even the best laid plans sometimes are tough to follow through on, right? That when you spend your entire working life building up this massive reserve and then you hit retirement and you go, well, I want to make sure that my kids are a little better taken care of, or I want to make sure that my family, my charitable interests are taken care of. It still counts on executing that plan. And I think there even then becomes some challenges to making sure that, you're following not just what the original owner of those assets wanted, but also you're following what the law says.
Yeah, I think you got to be careful, Kyle, and that I think dovetails into proper estate planning and not just you obviously have lots of questions how you want to set up your portfolio while you're living, but you also have to take into consideration where you want those assets to go for the next generation or for those charities. So I can't stress enough to my clients that you have to have a good plan in place. It has to be done appropriately with some legal oversight on it. So make sure that your beneficiaries are up to date. Make sure that those estate plans are what you intend, and that that you're taking into account all of those scenarios. And but make sure that it's done. And also, don't ever forget that you need to review that on a regular basis. This isn't something that you set and 20 years later it's still going to be appropriate for you. So make sure that you're continually looking at those plans, updating your beneficiaries so that you don't end up with a situation where money's going to places that you did not intend.
And of course, having that conversation with the ultimate beneficiaries can be helpful as well. Maybe they don't need to be fully read into here's all the assets and here's all the places they're going to go, but at least telling them we have a plan, this is how we intend to execute on that plan, or how we intend to have you execute on that plan when we can't do it anymore, I think is key. And it takes the conversation away from just the topics of the day of, well, eggs are expensive, and it brings it back to, I think, some of that longer term planning. And then, of course, Joel, we got news this week that maybe eggs aren't quite as expensive. And some CPI and producer price data that shows that inflation a little better maybe than it had been.
Right. The price of eggs dropped 12% last month from the month before. They're still up 49% from the year before that. But yeah, it's all relative. Yeah, if anybody's looking for hard numbers on the consequences of the tariffs, the whole Independence Day, the Liberation Day. Thank you. Yes, Liberation Day. Independence Day is something else.
It's a movie. Right?
Yes, yeah. But if you, for all the hand wringing that's been done about the tariffs, we're still not seeing it in the data. We had two big reports this week. One on inflation that showed that inflation on a year-to-year basis for the Consumer Price Index, which is the major measure of the broad inflation, that's at its lowest level since February of 2021. That was at 2.3%, so it's getting closer to what the Fed's goal of 2% is. The other report was the retail sales, which represents 44% of consumer spending. Consumer spending is the biggest driver of our economy, and that showed that people are still out there spending. Even though we're hearing reports from Mattel, from McDonald's, from Molson Coors this week, from Walmart, that because of the concerns over trade policies, that they're going to be raising prices, we're still not seeing it affect people and their spending.
Despite a consumer sentiment and consumer confidence measures that seem to show that consumers are just not feeling terribly excited about what's going on.
Well, there's either a disconnect or a delay because the consumer sentiment number that came out today, and it's a preliminary number for the month of May, that it's been down 30% this year so far, and it's been down 4 months in a row. And yet, like I said, consumers continue to spend. The retail stores continue to advance. Now, April's retail numbers weren't as robust as they were in March. It slowed down a little bit, but people are still spending. Yeah, the consumer sentiment number was pretty bad. It was, people are kind of miserable. People are expecting 7.3% inflation a year from now.
So, Joel, it's interesting because that particular indicator, the consumer sentiment, has historically had a very, very strong correlation with retail spending. The sentiment numbers did. We saw a very strange disconnect, and I'm not sure exactly on the dates, but following the pandemic, and I think it was largely during the time of spiking inflation that there was this real strong sentiment decrease from people feeling really lousy about their financial lives. Yet the spending didn't stop.
Maybe that made them feel better.
Maybe that was the way to continue. So it's interesting to me that we saw a very reliable indicator, something that was very correlated directly to spending, now suddenly becoming kind of unraveled.
The University of Michigan, which puts out the sentiment numbers, said that there was a slight increase in people felt a little bit better about the economy and about their own finances when the pause was put on some of the tariff things earlier in April. So it's going to be a matter of time to see what, if any, effect the later pause, the bigger pause with China, what kind of effect that has.
Well, and, the other thing that had tended to be on people's minds at the start of this year was what's going to happen with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Are we going to extend those first Trump term tax cuts into 2026 and beyond, or do they expire? Because that potentially is a big source of additional cost as well in the form of higher taxes. A bill, at least for now, on the table in Congress that might look to extend some of those, carve out some new special interests, we'll say, in the form of some giveaways to reducing or eliminating tax on Social Security, on tips, on overtime, even carving out some tax incentives for the automotive industry. And so I think a lot to pay attention to there. I'm less concerned about all those little carve-outs and more concerned about the bigger picture tax conversations, because that is a meaningful economic consequence. Taxes in general, a big piece of the overall picture for so many, that if we don't see some extension there, if we don't see some clarity, we might get later into the year with a lot of uncertainty about what the tax policy looks like. Well, with that, we enjoy doing the program for you. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to Money Talk with Bob Landis. If you have a financial question you want answered on next week's show, email it to moneytalk@landis.com. To keep informed throughout the week, visit our Money Talk page at landis.com.